If you would have asked me 5 years ago what the on-trend brewing thing would be in 2021, I would have guessed something with the letters I, P, and A. And I would have been wrong. Laugh all you want, but hard seltzer is here to stay. And Imperial Yeast's new seasonal strain W04 Paramount can help brewers get the most out of their water fermentations. A clean and aggressive fermenter, Paramount will produce an excellent seltzer with low fusel alcohols, plus it's gluten-free. If you tried making seltzer with standard ale or lager strains, you know the struggle, and Imperial Yeast is here to help with W04 Paramount. Learn more about this novel strain at imperialyeast.com and pick up your W04 Paramount before it's too late. Of the several things that can ruin beer, contamination by wild yeast and bacteria is one of the worst, as it can lead to a number of undesirable off flavors and usually results in a dumped batch. This is the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me on this episode to discuss brewery sanitation is contributor Cade Jobe.
You know, this one is a very popular listener requested experiment, right? How many emails have you gotten about comparing Star San and Iodophor? Because I know I got several, and it's really people don't usually email me about experiment ideas, so I can only imagine how many you got too. But this one was popular, and one that I was sort of embarrassed about performing because I had some, sort of expectations about how it would go. But it was a fun one, and I'm glad we ultimately ended up doing it.
Yeah, you're right. I've been getting emails from listeners, from people who read the website about sanitation experiments in general since we started this thing. I mean, people wanting us to do an unsanitized carboy versus a sanitized one. And then again, of course, there's the one about the different sanitation methods or the different types of sanitizers. While I certainly view things like ensuring adequate yeast pitch rates and controlling fermentation temperature as being important, sanitation of cold side gear is without question what I view as being the most crucial factor to brewing high quality beer that people want to drink. There are a bunch of microscopic critters out there that just want nothing more than to munch on the tasty wort that you spent hours producing, turning it into a disgusting dumper. Thankfully, we do have rather easy access to sanitizers that are both safe and effective. Two of the most popular being Star San and Iodophor. I'm sure everyone has heard of both. We'll be getting into depth on both of these sanitizers and discussing the results of that experiment you mentioned later on in this show. If you like what we're up to and you want us to keep doing it, consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy by committing to a small monthly pledge over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. You're going to receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with someone in the brewing world, such as Vinny Chilurzo from Russian River Brewing, John Palmer, Scott Janish, and so many more. All past sessions are stored on our private Facebook page, so patrons can go back and watch them whenever they like. Again, that's patreon.com/Brewlosophy. And if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by rating and reviewing it in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, we really would appreciate it. As in addition to giving us feedback, those ratings make the show more visible so that those who may not have heard of it yet can more easily find it. Feedback is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who offer brewers beautiful stainless gear from fittings, kettles, and fermenters to brew stands and incredibly well-built turnkey systems. Do yourself a favor and head over to brewershardware.com the next time you're in the market for brewing equipment. They're sure to have whatever it is you need, and be sure to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. Again, that's brewershardware.com. Adam Bleeker wrote in with some feedback regarding recipe design after listening to our recent experience episode where we talked about just that. Adam said, I started brewing a little over 1.5 years ago, and while I'm new to brewing, I have degrees in medicine, chemistry, and mathematics. My goodness. So I was naturally drawn to the science of brewing. Brewlosophy has been fundamental to my learning thus far. Right on, man. Just as in medicine, brewing has its own form of vitals, OG, FG, IBUs, and SRM. When I initially started, I remember copying exact amounts, pounds and ounces, from recipes I found online. However, I quickly realized this produced beers that were less than stellar. Now, when building a recipe, I start with beer vitals because they are consistent regardless of equipment or scale. For grain, this means starting with the OG and adding malt based on percentages. For hops, this means matching IBU for each kettle addition. One final pearl is to always adjust for alpha acid percentages between personal inventory and original recipe. As a numbers guy and lover of the science scientific method. My recipe design is very methodical. One of my favorite YouTube channels is Mean Brews. The developer, Matthew Harold, is highly involved in the BJCP and competition circuit. He delves into specific beer styles, collecting a cohort of competition-winning recipes and comparing ingredients and processes. Using statistical analysis, he develops an ideal recipe that the viewer can tweak based on evidence. Quite remarkable. I highly recommend checking it out. Definitely worth a shout out on the podcast. Well, there's your shout out, Adam.
Yeah, Adam. And hey, if you're interested in the sciencey technical things, you should check out the Brew Lab podcast, right?
That's right. Yeah, another shout out there.
Yeah, shout out to that as well. So I have a couple of comments. I generally agree with what you said, but your comment about the IBU or the percentage of malt not really mattering based on like your equipment or gear. I think that's really the opposite. I think it really does matter based on your equipment or gear. Now, once you've sort of identified what IBU you like to hit on your equipment, then you've come up with something that you can use for recipe design,
yes.
Right? And I think that's sort of, I think it's sort of that way. If you just kind of try to match an IBU, at least as in my experience, that's sort of all over the place depending on your experiment, right? In terms of what you're actually going to hit whenever it comes out. Or maybe you've got really fantastic equipment that's all calibrated and I don't. But that's sort of my comment there. The other thing sort of is the IBU as a metric. I'm sort of moving away from IBUs, and I think we talked about this in our recipe design because I don't think it really gives an accurate representation of perceived bitterness, of what the actual bitterness of the beer is. And I'll give you a great example. I just brewed a pale ale this past weekend, and I upped my Magnum dosage from, I usually use 20 grams. I put 28 grams in this one. 28 grams said it was going to produce like, I don't know, 60 IBUs or something on my equipment. I tasted that beer. There's no way it's 60 IBUs, and it's a pale ale. So I think even at 28 grams, that's still bitter. It hit the bitterness, the perceived bitterness level I want. But that's not 60 IBUs. I mean, it didn't taste like an IPA. So anyway, those are just a couple comments I had.
Yeah. First and foremost, Adam, I appreciate the shout out for Mean Brews. I had not heard of that YouTube channel. I'm not on YouTube that often anyways, but I did take a quick look and it looks like a rad resource, super legit stuff there, and something I plan to look more into during my downtime. Now that said, I'm basically with you, Cade. I really appreciate the shift that Adam made in his recipe design approach. I think that's, well, it's really understandable and one that I can sort of relate with. I feel like particularly when copying recipes that somebody else gives you. I mean, we were just talking recently about how the whole brewer's thumbprint thing, that I could give two people the identical ingredients and they can go and brew them at their homes and bring them back, and those beers are likely going to be different. There's just something about doing things in different places with different people that creates differences. But so I can appreciate what Adam's saying on that front, trying to match the numbers, being very methodical, which yes, Adam, you absolutely are going the methodical route here. That being said, I'm all for matching percentages with malt. I think that's the way to do it. However, if you're trying to match the percentages, for example, of a commercial recipe that you received from a pro brewer, and you are doing straight percentages, you're likely there's a chance that you may end up with some really wonky specialty grain amounts. Only I say that from personal experience, and so I usually will still adjust it just to make it the recipe look cleaner and simpler. I'm not going to put, for example, 8.624 grams of chocolate malt in a in a beer. I'm probably just going to round that up to 8 or 9 or probably 10 grams or something like that. Still, the percentage thing works. For me, the whole IBU thing, I'm with you on this, Cade. IBU is so incredibly, we're realizing, is not a terribly accurate measure of perceived bitterness. That plus the fact that we don't really use, yes, we are going to extract some bitterness. There's going to be isomerization of alpha acids in late kettle additions, but it's not what I'm concerned with. What I'm looking for in those late kettle additions 99% of the time is flavor and aroma. And so I use the amounts that I know work on my system. And I feel like that's key for my brewing. And in everybody's experience, I think, everybody has their own systems. They're using their own water. They're doing their own process. I think it's important to be somewhat subjective with the way you approach brewing beers. Just like you said, Cade, you knew that using 20 grams of Magnum, wasn't going to cut it for you. And so you bumped it up, even though that IBU predicted IBU was a bit out of the range in the calculator, in Brewfather, you tasted it and it was where you wanted it to be. To me, that's key. So if you're copying recipes, I think you're going about it that methodical way, Adam, is going to work really well for you. But in the end, when you start designing your own stuff and trying to make things that you really want, in my opinion, you got to kind of make some, be flexible at least with the way you're going about doing it. Thank you for the feedback. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. British beers are some of my favorite. Full malt flavor without being cloying, balanced hops, and that unique fermentation character. One of my favorite British styles is dark mild. So imagine my joy when I received a can of listener Matt Clay's Ride the Mild in the mail.
1 minute beer review with Justin and Tim.
Looks like we got some coffee here.
Yeah, this is a dark cup of shoe leather. Smells good. It's a bit hoppy. There's a lot of aroma.
I don't know what that is.
It's a dark beer.
It's not stout. It's
not sour. It's
not at all.
Yeah, I wouldn't think it was a stout.
I get that metallic-y taste.
This is definitely dry. And it's a dry beer.
Yeah.
This is pretty darn good.
It's really good. It's smooth. It's nutty.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of toasty notes.
There you go.
Toasted nuts.
I like it though.
This is a good beer.
But I do get that metallic kind of taste to it.
Okay, I'm starting to get that. Maybe a little minerally finish. I'm guessing that's probably the water pH. I could be wrong. It's like they used a spring pool water.
It is. I don't mind it. It's good.
Yeah, I'm thinking like a brown ale type of a thing. Mm-hmm. This is really good. The color, I'm going to give this is a 10.
Really?
Yeah, this is a 10 Timmy J for sure.
I don't actually like it that much, but it's, like
it's a beautiful color, Tim. It is the sunset.
Are we just judging the color now?
Yeah, that was all I was just doing, judging the color. Why don't you give it a Timmy J and tell me what you think, and I'll follow suit.
No, I'm a solid 8.
A solid 8?
Yeah.
I'm going to agree with you. Let's do this an 8. We'll call this an 8 on the Timmy J scale.
Wonderful, rich, bready aroma and flavor with hints of caramel and toasted nuts. This beer was so delicious. As is often the case with mild ale, at least in my experience, I felt the aroma packed a bit stronger of a punch than the flavor, which again, isn't a bad thing at all. It just made me want to keep coming back for more. It was a great beer.
I love it. Dark mild is one of those styles. I've had several American examples of an English dark mild. I guess I don't know if that's an oxymoron or not. But that's one of those beers that when next time I make my way over into England or Great Britain, I'm going to search out a cask ale version of a dark mild and have that. And it's really interesting. You said that the aroma packs this huge punch, but it wasn't necessarily lacking in flavor. It just didn't have as much. I got to wonder if that's the alcohol content, right? Because those things are usually, I don't know what Matt's alcohol content was at, but, they're right around that 3.5%, 4%, which is fantastic, right? Those are great, day drinking, week drinking, beers. And that's why they love them over there. I love it, man. It sounds like Matt made a great dark mild. And I'm just a little bit jealous that I didn't get to try it.
I know that's the part I feel bad with the Justin and Tim beer review thing now is that they send me the beers and so you guys don't get to try them. But I feel very fortunate that Matt sent it to me. I agree with you. There is something about, I think you think about it, to get lower alcohol, you got to use less grains, among other things, but you're using less malt, so you're not going to have that flavor, but those malts are still going to impart, the way they smell to the beer. And so that's just been my experience with mild in general. It's something I enjoy about it. Unfortunately, I heard from somebody recently who lives over in Britain, in the UK, who says that it's really difficult to find dark mild in pubs these days. You got to kind of go around and certain places will have, certain commercial versions of it. So do your research before you head over there, kid. Hey, thanks for sending that beer in, Matt. If you'd like to have your beer or any other fermented beverage you feel like sending in reviewed by Justin and Tim, you can email me, marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we'll get you all set up. We'll be back with talk of brewery sanitization right after this break. Chilling work can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Xchillerator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brewlosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Xchillerator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Xchillerator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to xchillerator.com today.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all-grain beer in a single, compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high-quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
Craftmaster Growlers takes traveling with and sharing beer to a new level. Made from heavy-duty stainless steel, Craftmaster Growlers are double-wall insulated and can keep beer cold for up to 8 hours. Unlike typical growlers, Craftmaster Growlers come with a swiveling tap and fully integrated CO2 regulator cap, allowing beer to stay fresh for 2 weeks or more. The square design takes up less space and will fit in most refrigerator doors, and every Craftmaster Growler comes with a 1-year warranty. There are 64 and 128-ounce versions available over at craftmastergrowlers.com. As much of a clean freak that I tend to be, I recall feeling almost overwhelmed when I first started brewing by the importance put on sanitation. Included with my kit was a small bottle of iodine, and the dude who sold it to me made sure to explain how imperative it is to make sure that all of the gear that touches the wort and the beer is well sanitized. Whereas some seem to take this with a grain of salt, which I just can't understand, I absolutely obsess over it, and to this day I've yet to make an unintentionally contaminated batch, so patting myself on the back a little bit there. Suffice to say, sanitation is very important, and thankfully it's not terribly difficult. Now, before we start breaking down the different types of sanitizers, I'd like to clarify some stuff up front, namely the difference between cleaning and sanitation, or sanitization.
Yeah, that's a big one. And I did a Brew Lab episode on this a while back with Rania Erikainen, who was over in, I believe, Finland. She did an entire bachelor's thesis on this issue of cleaning and sanitation in brewing, with a whole bunch of different yeast species, especially ones that people are using to use like non-alcoholic beer, or yeast species that also produce lactic acid bacteria, lactic acid. So it's really sort of an interesting episode, and I did encourage anybody to go back and listen to that. But it's a big deal, cleaning and sanitation. I mean, when you think about making beer, it's yeast that are taking sugars and making beer. It's an individual microscopic little yeast, right? You need millions of them in order to, sometimes I guess even billions, depending on the size of the batch, in order to do its job. And if you put other things in there, right? If you put bacteria and other, wild yeast or something like that in the batch too, you're going to have issues. And even a small amount, right? Even if you put, let's say you put 1,000 or 1,000,000 cells of bacteria in there, something that's just really tiny that you didn't even think about, like a crevice in your boil kettle, or not boil kettle, in your fermenter. It plays a big role, and it can really turn all of your hard efforts, into something that's not drinkable.
Well, yeah, and that's the whole point with pre-cleaning your gear before sanitizing it, is you want to make sure any little bits, dried hop bits or krausen from a prior fermentation, that stuff is gone, because bacteria and these microscopic microbes can get into those little crevices, hide there. You think you're sanitizing it, but that sanitizer is just not quite reaching that stuff. So you want to make sure that your equipment is clean before you sanitize it. Now, real quick, just a simple aside, you're probably going to hear me going back and forth between sanitation and sanitization. That's just because I'm kind of a word nerd, and sanitation is kind of the general term for cleaning and disinfecting, whereas sanitization really refers primarily, at least based on my Googling, to the disinfecting side of things. I apologize now, because I'm going to go back and forth between those, because I can't just help myself here. So anyways, make sure that your stuff is clean before you sanitize it. And there are various methods people can go about cleaning stuff. I like to use wide mouth fermentation vessels. The Delta Fermtake is my favorite right now. So I can get I use those little Scrub Daddy sponges that work really well for getting stuff off. And I scrub the hell out of that so that I know for sure that when I put that sanitizer in there prior to racking my wort in, that there's not going to be anything blocking that sanitizer from reaching the surface. And that's key, right? Clean before sanitizing.
Yeah, that's a big deal, right? When we talk about sanitation, most sanitizers, at least chemical sanitizers, require direct contact with the microbe in order to function. And we'll get into that a little bit in the future, but keep that in the back of your mind, because you have to, if you've got like a biofilm, that's what is sort of described in the industry. And that's just a buildup of unwanted microbes. And so they build up, they stack together. It's a great place for bacteria to be able to attach to a surface, and then pull nutrients into a colony, right? So it's like, like a crowdsourcing nutrition. And that's how it works. So you've got these thick biofilms there, and if you can kind of imagine it, right? It's like, how many licks does it take to get to the center of the Tootsie Roll Pop? If you're trying to kill all the bacteria and get to the center of the Tootsie Roll Pop, you've got to get rid of all the stuff outside before you can actually kill the microbes that are sitting at the center of the bacteria. So that's what cleaning does. Cleaning is busting off the candy shell so that you can get to the Tootsie Roll Pop and then take them out with sanitation.
That is the weirdest analogy that I've ever heard, but hey, I'll take it, Cade. It works. Right. Now, the other thing that I feel like we need to kind of clarify, because I see this one mixed up often, is the difference between sanitation and sterilization. So it's important to understand that when you're sanitizing something, what you're doing is doing your best to reduce the amount of microbes, including wild yeast and bacteria, to a low enough level as to render them important or impotent, and thus unable to spoil the beer. So you're not necessarily killing every little bit of microbial, bacteria and yeast that might be there. You're just reducing them so that the yeast can outcompete them. Now, that's something that we hear about often, right? Is that yeast, when you're pitching a large enough amount, that they can outcompete any other microbes that might be present, and that's key, right? The difference between sanitation or sanitization and sterilization is that sterilization is the elimination of any of that stuff. It's the removal of all microbes from a surface, which does take a bit more work. In fact, I believe in order to properly sterilize, you need heat, time, and if you're really good and you want to ensure that it's going to be very sterile, pressure as well, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. And the difference of sanitization is 99.999% effective. Like, that's the official definition according to the AOAC, the Association of Official Analytical Chemists. I think I got that right. I should have written it down. But yeah, so 99.999% effective. That's sanitization. Sterilization is 100%. Okay. Right. So that's the difference. I mean, even though there's just a tiny microscopic amount of bacteria left or whatever microbe left after sanitization, that's the difference. And like you said, Marshall, sterilization is getting completely rid of any microbial activity. And if you're in a lab setting, you can see how this would sort of work. We do what's called serial dilutions, and I won't go into that, but essentially you take like a mix of solution and then you dilute it a whole bunch of times, and that gives you where you can count down to like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever bacteria. Under a microscope or something like that. Mm-hmm. So that's how you can determine the difference between sanitation versus sterilization. Like you said, for brewers, we don't really care about sterilization. Yeast is this fantastic organism, especially brewer's yeast, has been selected over hundreds of years for its speed, right? We want fermentations to happen quickly. We want them to happen in a couple of days so that we can get beer and produce it. So we've been self-selecting, applying evolutionary pressure on Sax cerevisiae to go quickly and outcompete other things that would, potentially spoil beer. So this evolutionary pressure has made it where we don't have to worry about sterilizing all of our brewing equipment because yeast is going to just outcompete most of the things that are there.
That's right. Yeah. And that's what I was going to say. We've done a pretty doggone good job of getting yeast to the point to where they're capable of doing this. It's why, a good portion, I can't say all, but a good portion of the commercial beers you drink, they're not sterilizing their equipment, they're sanitizing it. And yet you're not having cans or bottles blow up on the shelf. I can't say all of them, but most of them. So again, just to reiterate, you've got cleaning, sanitation or sanitization, and sterilization. For this episode, we are focusing on the middle one there, sanitation. And so for cleaning, you're using detergents for the most part. You're using soaps, or I think probably some of the most common cleaning materials are alkaline-based cleaners. PBW or Brulosophy favorite would be the Exhilarator Brewery Wash, which the stuff is crazy. I use it to clean my grill stuff as well. But you're using a detergent. For sanitizing, you're using something else. And that is what we're going to focus on here. The two most common, at least in my experience, the two most common sanitizers are Star San, which is made by 5 Star Chemicals, and Iodophor, which is made by various companies. It's kind of a common term. Let's get into Star San first. Let's talk a little bit about what this stuff is made of and how it works.
Yeah, we should clarify too. For homebrewers, Star San and Iodophor is the most common. I think
exactly. Yeah.
For brewers, they're using also like peracetic acid's a really common one, and then there's you'll find Star San is a phosphoric acid and dodecyl benzene sulfonic acid. It's essentially an acid sanitizer, and then Iodophor is an iodine based sanitizer. But you'll find that Star San makes an iodine based sanitizer as well. Which is a version of Iodophor. So, there's a lot of different range of chemicals out there, but again, focusing today on Star San and Iodophor. And like I said, Star San is this blend of phosphoric acid and dodecyl benzene sulfonic acid. I really love saying that word, but I'm going to try not to say it too much.
Dodecyl benzene sulfonate. Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to sound like really smart at your homebrew club meeting, just go and be like, oh yeah, I sanitized this one with dodecyl benzene sulfonic acid.
If you want to lose friends, Cade. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, and go back and listen to the podcast that we did a couple weeks ago on getting beers reviewed and stuff.
Right, exactly.
Have our Brews Views episode on that. Anyway, so it's an acid anionic sanitizer, and that's important. Acid is it's essentially an inorganic acid, which is phosphoric acid that's present already in beer. So it makes a great sanitizer there for bacteria and microbes, because a lot of those bacteria and microbes don't like contact with that acidic element. But the thing that sets Star San apart is its acid in combination with a surfactant, and that's that dodecyl benzene sulfonic acid. And surfactants are really important, both in detergents and in sanitizers, right? Cleaners. And essentially what it does is it just mixes everything up. Like if you put oil and water together, they separate, right? Because oil and water don't mix together. But when you add detergent, like when you're cleaning your dishes, that surfactant is what binds together the oil and the water so that you can get rid of both and clean the surface. And that's important. So Star San, with their acid anionic sanitizer, they are able to do a little bit of cleaning as well. So they're able to sort of bind some of those bacteria or biofilms and then attach it and neutralize it with that inorganic acid. Now, it's also important here to mention too that this one works. Star San works by a negative charge on the molecule. So the phosphoric acid and dodecyl benzene sulfonic acid essentially it means that it reacts with cations, which are like hard water. So calcium and magnesium, those things that are in hard water, it reacts with those and can neutralize somewhat quickly. So it's sort of the benefit of it is that it reacts with microbes that may have like a positive charge on their cell, and it neutralizes those microbes. But if you've got it in hard water, you've got to use it quickly. It won't sit around, at least in that hard water solution.
Yeah. So there's also another unique characteristic of Star San that anyone who has used it is very well aware of. You've likely heard the term "don't fear the foam." My understanding is that surfactant is also what's responsible for the foaming, Cade. Is that accurate? Or
yeah, absolutely.
So, and that foam, the nice thing about it is that foam carries all of the same sanitizing properties as the liquid. In fact, they will say, let it foam up and sit on the surface of whatever it is you're trying to sanitize for a minimum of 30 seconds. And that will properly sanitize that surface. Again, assuming that it is already clean. Again, that foam is not going to break inside it's not going to reach any bacteria or other microbes that might be sitting inside a little blip of Croizon. So you need to make sure it's clean before you use this stuff. But the foam is a good thing. The foam is your friend. Now, this is considered a no rinse sanitizer, meaning that any remnant Star San in a fermenter is okay to be there as it breaks down into basically a sugar and dissolves as an extra nutrient in the beer, ostensibly helping the yeast out, which I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah. And the mechanism of this isn't very clear how this works, right? I've heard this mentioned a couple of times anecdotally, but I wasn't able to find a good source for this online. So if you have one, please send us feedback. I'd love to read it. But essentially, it's that dodecylbenzene sulfonic acid. It's that part. That part binds together and creates the sugar. And so really all you have left is this sugar and phosphoric acid, which phosphoric acid is already present in beer.
Right.
So that's not going to hurt any flavor as long as you're not dumping huge amounts of it in. But the amount in this is so minimal that you're not going to have any flavor differences. And then it just sort of has this yeast nutrient impact. I'm not sure. I think the dodecylbenzene sulfide binds to a sugar like a glycoside, and then it just sort of either gets taken up or broken down by the yeast. In terms of the nutrient addition. But that's kind of a cool thing, right? Is if you're using a different sanitizer, like let's say for example, peracetic acid, right? That's acetic acid and can create a like this vinegary off flavor. If anybody's ever used it, it smells terrible.
It's awful. Yeah.
Yeah. And it will eventually settle out in water and become odorless. But I don't know about what would happen if you put it in beer, or even think worse, chlorine, right? Chlorine was a very, very common sanitizer for a long time. And that stuff stinks. And when it gets in beer, it gets some really nasty off flavors.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah, that's your chlorophenols and yucky. You don't want that stuff in there. So real quick, just to run down how to use Star San. Again, we're preaching to the choir here, I'm sure, but you basically mix 1 ounce of Star San with 5 gallons of water. That's 30 milliliters per 19 liters. Some prefer keeping their Star San solution in a small spray bottle and then just misting that on the surface of whatever it is they're sanitizing. That is a perfectly valid way to sanitize. All you need is that surface covered so that the Star San can do its work. So now, one of the things I think a lot of us appreciate about making larger batches, at least I do, of sanitizer is that you can keep it around for quite a while. So if and reuse it over and over, as long as it's not dirty. Star San can basically be reused until it's changes color, which might mean that it gets hazy because your water is hard over time. In fact, I use my Star San solution as an indicator of what water I'm getting from what source during the time of the year. If it turns hazy within a 24-hour period, I know that I've got the hard water that I'm going to have to treat a different way than I do my soft water. So when I'm using my soft water, I'm no joke. I can keep a batch of Star San around for a good 4 months or so before having to swap it out. It'll stay crystal clear and the pH will stay above 3.0. Now that's another thing that 5-Star says is as soon as your pH gets above 3.0, you want to swap it out and make a new batch. Not a hard thing to do. You just mix up another 5 gallons of water with that small amount, 1 ounce of Star San, and you're good to go.
Yeah, Star San's super easy to use. And one of the things I love about Star San especially is like if I'm using it to sanitize a keg and I'm interested to know like when I'm sort of getting up to a full beer, the foam that's in that keg will start pushing out of the gas poppet.
Yeah.
And that's sort of like right when I know, okay, cool, I'm done. Let's finish right here. And that's as much beer as I want to transfer to the keg. Otherwise, you're sort of worrying about getting the dip tube, stuck in beer and then creating suckback issues in your regulator and stuff. And the other thing too is the visual impact. You can actually see the foam sticking to the sides of whatever you're cleaning or sanitizing, so you know that everything got covered, which is kind of nice. So that's one of the things I like about Star San.
That's one of when I'm making a new batch of Star San, it's almost always when I'm kegging. And so I'll just fill up a full keg with the lid off because I'm gonna push that CO2, or I'm use CO2 to push that Star San solution out into my Star San bucket. And has anyone ever heard the term of a keg snake? That's what I refer to that foam that comes out of the top of the keg is. So, but Star San's awesome. I mean, it works really well, but there are other options. And one of those is iodophor, which arguably has been around quite a bit longer than Star San, as it were. Iodophor is just the term used for solutions containing iodine and a solubilizing agent like a surfactant, which is in iodophor, and it allows the iodine to be slowly released into solution over time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if we're looking at old school, sanitizers, iodine was one back from like the 1800s. Whenever they've sort of realized like, oh, you can use this. I actually, sort of an interesting anecdotal story. I had this utility belt that my grandfather had in World War II.
Wow.
And yeah, I know, right? I don't know how I ended up with it. How lucky I was to end up with it. But in there's these little packets that are like breakable glass packets, and they're filled with iodine. And the purpose was, hey, if you got a cut or something, or if you got if you needed to disinfect a wound, you had these field iodine, and that's what you would put on it. And I just thought, oh, that's really cool. So iodine's been used for a long time, and like you said, it's just that iodophor is that mix of a solution of iodine with a surfactant. But we all know, anybody that's used iodine knows iodine doesn't foam up like Star San does
at all,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, depending on when you put the iodophor in the water, it can foam up a little bit. Like just watered foams sometimes too, depending on what's in the water. But yeah, it doesn't foam at all. And when you're putting it, in like a stainless steel vessel, it just sort of coats right down the side of the vessel and then drops into the bottom, and you can't really see if it's like touching all the sides. So it has that surfactant, but again, that surfactant is serving a purpose not to create foam and like Star San does, but it's to bind and solubilize those any biofilms that may be in solution. Because again, both of these work, iodophor and Star San, by the active compounds, that phosphoric acid or the iodine, coming into contact with a microbe, and that microbe dies essentially, or loses its ability to produce vital nutrients, and so it doesn't reproduce, and eventually it's just gone, right? Instead of infecting things.
Yeah, and that, I did a little Googling. I did not know this ahead of time, so I don't want to sound smarter than I am here. But iodophor, iodine in general, works by penetrating cell walls and membranes of unwanted microbes that might be on the surface of your fermentation vessel or your keg, and interfering with DNA synthesis, which I'm almost certain is different than the method of action of Star San.
I think so. My understanding, again, there's not a lot out there about Star San, so I would love for somebody to explain to me the mechanism for it. There's much more research on iodophor, again, because I think Star San is a proprietary chemical, obviously, and iodophor is just, like we said, it's a mix of iodine and a solubilizing agent, so I'm sure that's why there's been a little bit more study on it. But yeah, so my understanding is that surfactant binds to the microbe or to the biofilm, and then the acid somehow, I don't think it messes with the cell wall, but it messes up with the ability of the microbe to reproduce. And I don't know the mechanism of that. So this is a little bit, a little bit of a different function, but still they're doing the same thing, right? They're stopping the yeast or the bacteria from growing. Now, an important part that we should say here too is that iodophor has, or rather iodine, has a really broad spectrum. It'll kill viruses, although I don't know about COVID, so don't try to use it on COVID.
Don't drink iodine.
Please don't drink iodine. You can drink Star San, just not in huge amounts. It'll kill bacteria, and it will kill yeasts too. Now, it doesn't affect brewing yeast or most, Brettanomyces or some other yeast, but it does kill a few yeasts out there.
Well, my understanding is that it may very well affect, brewing yeast and Brettanomyces, just not in the levels that are left over after, you're done sanitizing your vessel. So, if you were to pour 2 ounces of iodophor into a pouch of imperial yeast or something, I have a feeling it would probably render those yeast unuseful at the very least. But
that's probably true.
Who knows though? But I will say that similar to Star San, and I think this is interesting, iodophor is actually considered no rinse, which a lot of people I don't think understand. I've talked to people, I know local brewers here who rinse out anything that they sanitize with Star San, primarily because if you've ever smelled the stuff, it smells like you're going in to give blood or something. I mean, mean, that is what they use when they're rubbing that. I think nowadays they mostly use rubbing alcohol, but they used to, when I would donate blood, they'd spend a good 30 seconds rubbing, a Q-tip with a bunch of iodine on it all over my arm before inserting the needle. And that's because it's going to neutralize or kill any of the bacteria stuff that might make you sick.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's it's kind of interesting that we look at this as like Star San's. They're no rinse, but I had a friend who swore that both Star San and Iodophor, that he could taste them in beer or in bottles whenever they were when there was somebody used that as the sanitizer, and he would say, I can taste the metallic of iodine, and Star San smells briny. It makes the beer smell salty. And I just kept wondering, I was like, I just don't get that. I mean, I've had a beer before. I think I've shared this story where I left like a gallon or two of sanitizer in a fermenter or in a keg and racked straight into that keg without realizing I forgot to dump the damn sanitizing solution.
You and like half of homebrewers out there.
Yeah, right? And I was like, crap. And of course, like most homebrewers is, okay, well, I'm going to taste it and see if it tastes okay.
Don't want to waste it.
Yeah, I'm not going to waste this. And actually, it tasted fine. I didn't notice any difference. I mean, I did end up dumping it because I was a little bit worried about drinking that concentration of sanitizer But all that to say, it doesn't seem. These are the big benefits of these: is they may have an odor whenever they're in solution, but once they're in beer, they're relatively odorless, and that's a big deal. And that's why they're considered no rinse sanitizers. Now, I always have concerns about, especially if it says no rinse, right? I don't want to rinse it. I want it there because it just did the job of sanitizing the surface. Adding water just seems like you're adding in another variable or another source of possible contamination.
Yeah, and who knows how sterile or sanitary that water is. I mean, we can get away. We have bacteria all over us all day long, all the time. So who knows how much is in that water that you may be kind of defeating the purpose of the sanitizer. So I'm with you. If it's no rinse, I'm not rinsing it. So.
Yeah, and it's not even just the water, like the bacteria that's in the water, the jug or whatever you got the water from. I mean, did you sanitize the, whatever equipment touched the water?
Yeah.
And did you rinse that? How did you rinse that? I mean, it just kind of keeps going. If you just got it out of the tap or whatever, I mean, who knows? But
Yeah. Well, using iodophor is about the same as using using Star San. You use a little bit less though. You're going to go half of an ounce mixed into 5 gallons of cold water. It has to be cold water apparently, which is 15 milliliters per 19 liters. That's again half the amount of Star San, which is 1 ounce or 30 milliliters per 19 liters, and that will achieve the approximately 12 ppm of iodine that's necessary for sanitization purposes. So, the best way to describe it is if you are making up a fresh batch of iodophor sanitizer solution, it is going to look kind of like the way black tea looks when you make it. It has that, it's dark, but still see-through. You can still see through it. It's not so dark. Apparently, I read somewhere recently when I was doing research for this episode, actually, that if you go overboard with the sanitizer, it actually won't carry the same sanitization qualities as it should. It won't work as well. So you want to make sure to do, approximately that half ounce to every 5 gallons of cold water to get that sanitizer solution made. Again, fully coat the surface. Allow no less than 2 minutes of contact time. Now, it's kind of up in the air if you can use iodine from a spray bottle. I don't know if I'd recommend that. From what I've read, you really want contact time for 2 minutes or more. And so that can be kind of difficult if you're spraying it on and it dries off. That's just my thought, though. I don't know if you have a different idea, Cade.
Yeah, no, I like to use iodophor as my instant contact sanitizer rather than Star San. Although I may be backwards on that, but that's how I've done it, and it hasn't worked out poorly yet. But it was interesting you talking about that ppm and how the ppm can, if you have too much of the sanitizer in solution, that negatively impacts the ability of the sanitizer to do its job. And that makes sense. I think I forgot to mention the mechanism. So it has that surfactant, but that surfactant in iodophor is meant to bind up iodine. And iodine in its free form is what causes the issues with the microbes. That's what attacks the cell wall. It interferes with DNA synthesis and all all that sort of stuff. It's just free iodine.
Yeah.
So you're trying to, it makes sense to me now that if you add too much in solution, you've got a whole bunch more of the surfactant that's binding up iodine, right?
There you go.
So you don't have as much free iodine that's able to sanitize. So I just wanted to sort of throw that in there. But yeah, in terms of the spray bottle, I actually rotate. So this is an interesting thing too. I keep a spray bottle of sanitizer inside of my kegerator. And so anytime I'm done with the taps, like if I go pull a beer off the tap, I'll usually spray down the tap with the sanitizer, pull a beer, spray down the tap again so that nothing grows inside the tap handle. And I actually switch out between Star San and Iodophor. I just go back and forth.
I do the swippy swap as well, but I don't do it. I don't spray down my faucets. I'll wipe them down. I keep a bucket of Star San next to my brewery equipment all the time. I always have it there, and so I'll just have I'll dip some paper towels in there and wipe down my faucets. But now, so in terms of reusability, speaking of keeping sanitizer around, I always keep Star San around, and that's because it lasts quite a bit longer. You can tell that iodophor solution is starting to near its end of its life when it starts to change the color of normal water. When it starts to lose that copper tint, that is when you need to replace it. You have to have a specific amount, around that 12 ppm mark of available iodine in there in order for it to do its work. So I like to use Star San for just keeping around the brewery because of the fact that it tends to last quite a bit longer. So that's been my experience with it. Now, in terms of comparisons on things that I think brewers might find important, iodophor costs nearly half as much as Star San for the same exact volume. So I went and looked at morebeer.com. You can get a 16-ounce jug of iodophor for $12 or a 16-ounce jug of Star San for $18. Not a crazy difference, $6 there. However, considering that you use half as much iodophor, that's effectively double the number of batches of sanitizer you can make. But then that Star San is going to last a lot longer if you're making 5-gallon batches of it. So it's kind of a toss-up in my book. I keep both on hand at all times, and I'll switch back and forth for my sanitization purposes for, say, kegs and fermentation vessels. And I still keep a batch of Star San around so that I can rinse off beer glasses and such in it, which I found to be a really good, like you said, it does a fair amount of cleaning as well. And when you're drinking a beer glass, it's not like you've got crud in there that needs to get knocked off. You just want to get it clean and sanitized. So I use it for that kind of stuff around the brewery.
Yeah, I keep that around in my refrigerator, and I do every once in a while just sort of like check to make sure that the iodophor is still that sort of black tea orangey color, iodine looking color. And I don't know, I wonder. I think I read something a while back about the temperature stabilizing it, but I may be totally off base there. And I did just check. I am backwards on iodophor and Star San, so I'm going to make that change. Iodophor needs a 2-minute contact time versus Star San just needs like 30 seconds or less. Yeah, I keep, like I said, I keep both sanitizers in my brewery. I have both in them right now. I only have one type of cleaner. I have that the Exhilarator cleaner, which I love. But I have both iodophor and Star San. And like I said, I think I've mentioned this on a prior episode. I don't know why I switch back and forth. Both of them do the job for the brewery, so I don't really need to switch back and forth. But there's just, for some reason, I just like, I don't know. Maybe it's just my own comfort knowing that there's nothing that's gonna happen. So I keep both of them around. Like I said, I have a solution of either Star San or iodophor sitting in my kegerator at all times in a spray bottle. So that, if I need it, it's always right there.
Well, if you're like me, you probably read the article somewhere on some forum a few years ago where somebody was making the claim. I guess they did some like lab work, and they made the claim that iodophor is far more effective against wild yeast, and that Star San's not. That's since been, I believe, debunked. But it was because of that I ended up switching back and forth. So perhaps you saw the same thing and it kind of stuck. Well, I spent my first couple of years brewing using just iodophor only because that's what came with my kit, and since I wasn't getting contamination, I just kept using it. And then sometime around 2010, concerned about the staining on my fermentation buckets, which iodophor absolutely does, as well as the smell of the stuff, I picked up some Star San and have used it hundreds of times since then. Were either of these sanitizers affecting the quality of my beer? That is exactly what we aim to find out in an experiment you performed, Cade. Results when we're back from this break. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD, that's BRUPOD, at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. The brew in a bag method has blown up over the last few years, and in that time, it's become very clear that not all bags are created equal. For the best BIAB experience, you have got to go with the Brew Bag. Made from high-quality, food-safe polyester, the Brew Bag is available in both 210 micron for standard brew in a bag, as well as 400 micron, which works beautifully for all-in-one recirculating systems. I've been a Brew Bag user for years and wouldn't brew without it. Head over to brewinabag.com to get the fabric filter that works for you, and use promo code TBP17 at checkout to receive a discount. Again, that's brewinabag.com. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer, and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. There is a very popular saying out there, we drink with our eyes first, which when it comes to beer is usually in reference to making something that looks good enough to want to drink. However, it's also sort of what inspired my move away from iodophor, as I found that coppery tint it left on my plastic fermentation buckets kind of unsettling, as well as its pungent smell. I started using Star San and felt validated by the fact it was essentially colorless and odorless, but in the end, did it really matter? This is the question that inspired you to test it out, Cade.
Yeah, and I started up at the top of the show saying I was a little bit embarrassed to have done this experiment, and I want to clarify that. The reason why is because I have used both of these, and I know people that use these. I know hundreds of people use Star San and Iodophor with no negative impact on their beer, right? So I fully came into this going like, I mean, I know a bunch of people want us to do this and prove this, but it just sort of, I wasn't sure what was going to happen, right?
You know, it's funny. For every experiment idea that we have, we probably get 15 emailed to us. So there are times where there's a person out there looking at what we did, and there's one place on the internet, Reddit, where they will say this, and I think it's because the anonymity piece of it, but they'll call us out and say how stupid it was. Well, really, you're not tearing us down. We're doing what people have been requesting us doing in the best, cleanest way possible. And this was one of those variables. I was one of the people who in the back of my mind was saying, this is kind of dumb, but I guess, people want to see it. We might as well try it out. So, but I'm not judging you, Cade. I don't think you should be embarrassed by the fact that you did this experiment.
I was saying I was embarrassed before doing the experiment. Afterwards, I was looking back going, okay, yeah, these things do have different mechanisms. They have different impact. They work a different way. They look a different color. Iodophor actually, like we said, stains equipment. So maybe they are going to actually have, an impact on this. And also, this kind of hit at the same time that I did the experiment on, or not that I did the Brew Lab episode on Cameron Selna's experiment where he ran hop oils inside of a tube, inside of draft lines, and coated just the inside of the draft lines. And apparently that had some antimicrobial activity. And so it got me thinking like, hey, if iodophor is coating the insides of these, is it a better sanitizer or something? And I was like, well, let's just see that. Let's just see if they have a different taste impact. So that's what we did. So in this experiment, I went with a cream ale. So I did a dual 5-gallon batches of cream ale in the Unibrow brow supply units. And so importantly, I should start there. All of the equipment, at least hot side, wasn't sanitized. So it's just cleaned. So no sanitizer is in contact with the beer yet. Okay. I just want to start there with that because I think it was a question that I got in feedback on this experiment. Anyway, so it's dual 5-gallon batches of cream ale in my brow supply units. 71% pale malt, which was actually went malt that was malted at OSU Barley World. And then 29% flaked maize. Brewing process was pretty standard for a cream ale. I mashed both at 148 Fahrenheit or 64 C for 60 minutes. And then when the mashes were complete, removed the grains and boiled for 60 minutes with just a light hopping schedule. So I did 7 grams of Magnum at 60 minutes, 7 grams of Galena at 30 minutes, 15 grams of Tettnang at 10 minutes, and 15 grams of Tettnang at flame out. So just kind of a nice light hopping schedule, very traditional. When the boils were complete, both worts were chilled, and refractometer readings confirmed, hydrometer readings confirmed that both hit the same gravity, which was 1.040 OG. So again, this is a little lower gravity than I think most people would put in a cream ale, but that's one of the things I like about cream ales is their drinkability.
Yes.
And it's at this point that the variable comes into effect. So from this point on, every piece of equipment that came in contact with the beers was treated either with Star San or Iodophor, and that's everything from. I mean, I went so far as like tri-clamp fittings on the top of the the top of the fermenter for attaching the blow-off tube versus the gas line, which doesn't ever even come into contact with beer. But so this is where it is. So before transferring the beer to the fermenters, they were each sanitized with one or the other sanitizer. So one of them got Star San, the other one got Iodophor. And like I said, every piece of equipment from there on was either sanitized in Star San or Iodophor, which if you haven't, just as sort of as a side anecdote, that was really hard.
What a pain. I know. But that's what we love about you, Cade. I mean, you went to the nth degree, every piece of tubing, every disconnect, everything.
Yeah,
so,
everything.
And again, this is the stuff that we do to try to keep these experiments as valid and as clean as possible. So that is the pains that we go through. I'm not trying to, get any sympathy here, but what you did was the right way to do this, Cade. So I think if there is a finding in this, is that particularly if there's a significant result, we can look back and isolate and say, well, it really does seem to be the type of sanitizer that was used. So good job on this one.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was a pain, but for good science. So, all right. So both of the beers got racked into fermenters, into brew bucket fermenters, and then I pitched a pouch of Imperial Yeast's A07 flagship into each batch, and then put both of the worts in the chamber and let them ferment at 66F or 19C for a few days before adding a 15-gram Tettnang dry hop. Just wanted to have a little bit of additional hop character in it. And then after another few days, I think it was after only like 5 days, hydrometer measurements were taken showing both finished at the same FG, which was 1.001, which was way drier than I expected. Maybe it had to do with something with the barley malts. the way that it was malted at Went Malt, or at way the Went Malt was malted at Barley World. Yeah. Or I did ferment at 148, so it was a nicely fermentable mash. So I don't know how
you mashed it at 148.
Yeah, exactly. Mashed at 148. So maybe it was a nicely fermentable mash. Anyway. So all right, so ready to keg the beers. Now again, everything is sanitized, either Star San or Iodophor. So they're both going into kegs. One of the keg particularly the keg with Star San, had foam in it. It's just because that's the normal usage of Star San is for it to have foam. So as part of my normal keg sanitizing process, I fill up an entire keg of sanitizer and then I push it out with CO2. So there's a little bit of sanitizer that's going to be left in the bottom of the keg. And it just happens every time. So there's a little bit of iodophor and a little bit of sanitizer in the bottom of the keg. And again, the sanitizer, the Star San one, is going to have the foam. So, the Star San one, whenever the foam starts coming out of the dip tube, that's sort of whenever I know, that the beer, that the keg is full. And so I could see in this one that there was foam coming out of the dip tube as I was filling these kegs in the Star San version, and not so in the Iodophor version. But I just thought those were interesting. So again, all of the tubing is sanitized in either sanitizer, in Star San or Iodophor, and nothing is cross-contaminated. So from that point, the beers are in the kegerator, or in the keg itself. And I even, remember I told you I keep a bottle of sanitizer to spray off the kegs, or the taps, whenever I'm filling the things. So I even sprayed the taps with different sanitizers. Okay. So I like it. Just to make sure that there was no way that anything could mess this up, other than it just being those sanitizers. So everything's in the kegs. I burst carbonated them overnight, using my normal gas process, burst carb process, and then reduced them to serving pressure, let them sit for about a week, and then served them to participants.
And again, did you spray the participants with either of the sanitizers? Because at this point, it seems like that's what you were doing.
Spritz their mouth a little bit before.
Yeah, exactly. How's that taste? Yeah. Well, I've done the thing where I'm like suck siphon starting out of a Star San thing, and it's actually quite sour. The phosphoric acid is it's palatable. You can taste it. So, all right. So tell us a little bit about, I'm looking at the photos of these two beers. I mean, once you racked the cream ales into those kegs, or once you purged those kegs of the different sanitizers with CO2, they were never opened again. So we all know that oxidation can change the color of a beer. That's something that most of us are aware of these days. I'm looking at these two beers. The foam quality looks exactly the same. The color looks exactly the same. The clarity looks exactly the same. Did you, in real life, see any differences between these beers?
No, I didn't see anything at all different. Nothing in the way that they fermented, nothing in the way that they poured or transferred. And whenever I was drinking them, nothing looked different at all. I mean, they looked exactly identical, which is fantastic. If you want to be able to switch between sanitizers, then you want them to look the same and come out the same. And interestingly, with that photo, I was really impressed with my ability on that photo too, because normally I'm going to pat my own back a little bit here.
It's okay, man.
But because normally whenever you pour those, you pour and like one batch sits there, and then the foam sort of starts to degrade a little bit. So the foam is just usually different between the two batches, but these two looked great, and I was like, man, and that cream ale recipe, the foam was very nice. I think it was because of that Tettnang dry hop, just really helped the foam, but the foam really stuck around on that beer, which was awesome.
They look beautiful. I'd have drank the hell out of that beer, no doubt. So you did your first series of triangle tests. Now this was non-COVID data collection, luckily, so you were able to serve it to participants. But before we get to that, what was your experience like? You did 5 triangle test attempts. You drank these beers side by side numerous times. You were biased as hell, but what was your experience drinking these?
Yeah, so interestingly, I got it right 3 out of 5 times, right? But I was guessing. I was totally guessing. This is one of those times where the random guessing actually resulted in a false positive, right? If it was just me doing this, it would have been, 60% of the time, Cade was right. Well, no,
not too shabby, right?
Yeah, I just guessed, I guessed it right 3 times out of 5. And when I say guess, I mean like literally just, you have to write down one or the other, right? You've got to pick one of the three beers that you're doing in the triangle test.
Right.
And so you pick one and you just hope that it's the right one. And that's what I did. The beers were all perceptibly identical. They tasted great. That foam was fantastic. They were a little more bitter and hoppy than I would have expected for a cream ale, but I liked it. I started later serving it to guests, calling it a rustic cream ale, and I think that was appropriate.
Well, your hopping schedule wasn't terribly traditional. Most cream ale that I'm aware of has like one bittering addition, and that's it. You wanted something a little bit more unique, which is perfectly fine. But you couldn't tell these beers apart, so you took them and you served them to 29 blind, willing subjects, participants, and of those 29, 15 would have had to identify the unique sample in order for us to say, based on a p-value of 0.05, that this was a significant finding, and in the end, how many people actually chose the odd beer out.
14, so it was not a significant finding.
14 people. And now I get it. People are going to look and say, well, that's, almost 50%. It's 48%. How can that not be? Remember, it's a triangle test. So you've got to be just enough over that with any amount of confidence that there is a noticeable, perceptible difference based on this from a subjective, a sensory analysis perspective. So only 14 out of 29 got it right, which is not a significant finding. Again, which that all we can say there is that in this specific experiment where we compared a cream ale, a relatively light, simple cream ale, that all the cold side equipment was sanitized with Star San, from one where all the cold side equipment was sanitized with Iodophor. There was not a reliably distinguishable difference there. Tasters were unable to tell them apart consistently. And I think that's interesting. Now, I will say this. Afterwards, we got, we're going to go through some reader comments here in a minute, but I remember one person responding saying that one of your participants responded saying that they tasted a difference. Now, I'm not saying they didn't, but there is no way statistically for us to decipher whether what they tasted is because they learned that they got it right later on, so they're more confident in the fact that they happened to guess the odd beer out, or if they actually tasted a difference there. It's possible there were certain people with certain sensitivities, and I don't want to negate that or minimize it. I just think overall, based on this, you can probably, at least in my mind, you could probably get away with sanitizing with either Star San or Iodophor and have the same result, which is no surprise to most people, I'm sure.
Yeah. And it's actually, a shout out to Jordan Folk from the Portland Brewers Collective. And it was Jordan who had that experience, right? And in talking with Jordan, he was very confident in his selection before he even knew what the answer was, right? Before he even knew, he was very confident that the Iodophor one tasted a little bit more bitter or more hoppy. And he'll still tell you that. Actually, one of the most recent episodes of the Brew Lab was where we talk about statistics. So it turns out Jordan is a social scientist where his job is statistics.
Yeah.
And so we just did an episode on the Brew Lab and we talk about this one. And it's really easy too, right, to look at this and go, well, you were expecting 15 to get it right, and that would have been significant, but you got 14 and that's not significant. So that's just one person. Well, yes, it is. And that's what allows us to say with 95% confidence that this result will mimic real life. If you did this result 95 times out of 100, if you did this experiment 95 times out of 100, this is the result you would get. Now, the other thing too, in this one, we had 30 participants in this. So that's a big sample size. And so that makes it harder to achieve significance. But on a variable like this, differences in sanitizer, that's super important. So go check out the episode with Jordan Folk of the Brew Lab where we talk about brewing statistics. And thank you to the Portland Brewers Collective. The other thing I'd say on this is I served this to two homebrew clubs, so Portland Brewers Collective and to the Corvallis Brewers Collective. And you can't look at the results separately, but the Portland Brewers Collective, I think, had a much higher sensitivity to it than the Corvallis Homebrewers group. Now, that's not saying that one is a better taster or anything. I just wonder, what does the experience, do to this, or did it do anything? And that's just sort of an interesting, comment I've had tossing around in my mind.
Well, yeah, and there's no way for me to know whether what somebody tasted is what, was actually the difference or how strong that was or whatever. And I feel like when it comes to science, that there's no hard feelings, and I'm not questioning. Jordan's a great brewer and a great guy. I mean, but I do think it's interesting. I forgot that it was him who's the one who commented on that. But I do think it's interesting because in all of these, you will have people who, when they find out, now you're saying Jordan was confident even prior to you telling him what the odd beer out was. But you will have people who, when they find out they were right, who can sell you on why it was that their selection was right and what it was about those beers that made them able to do that. So it's just an interesting thing. And to me, all it does is it opens up that door to further experimentation. As lame as I thought this experiment might have been up front, I actually want to see it done again with different styles of beer.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that, correct me if I'm wrong, Cade, I think one of the things that Jordan said was that he prefers Iodophor for hoppier beers because it makes the hops pop more, in his opinion.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's some evidence about this, right? Phosphoric acid is an oxidizing agent, or it can be an oxidizing agent. And in beer, so that means if you've got those, hop compounds that are very sensitive to oxygen, you can pull out hop bitterness theoretically, right? Now,
so
again,
interesting. Yeah.
In the concentrations that you're adding, in terms of the Star San sanitizer, I don't think that's it may not be as likely, but who knows? I mean, and again, I don't want to like poo-poo on the Corvallis Homebrew Club's tasting. They're like super experienced brewers. I mean, most of the people in that club have been brewing for 30 years, so it's like, they're incredible tasters. It just makes me wonder too, like, what about those was different, or would there even have been differences on those tasters? But again, we had 29 participants and it was not significant in this experiment. So that's the takeaway.
Well, some of the stuff you talked about is going to be covered here in one of the comments that we got. We'll start with it from Alex, who said, I found that the residue from Star San oxidizes sensitive compounds quickly. I made a large batch of, this sounds very interesting, beet mead, and have packaged in bottles sanitized with both Star San or iodophor. The latter kept its color much longer. So what Alex is saying here is that that when he sanitizes with iodophor, at least with his beet mead, that the mead kept the color that it was supposed to be longer than the one sanitized with Star San. So before you comment on this, Cade, I don't remember if you were around at this point, but years ago, as the whole New England IPA cold side oxidation thing really started to become an issue in brewing, Ray Found, who used to be with Brewlosophy, started to speculate that perhaps it had something to do with Star San. And I don't know where he got the idea from, but what he ended up doing was going out and taking 2 samples of an IPA he had on tap, and into one of them he put a couple ounces, maybe an ounce of Star San solution, which is mostly water, right? So he had some Star San solution mixed up in his garage. He put a little bit in a cup with the IPA, and the other one was left alone. And sure enough, what he ended up finding, again, this is completely anecdote, garage science, we didn't get anything tested, was that over time, the batch of IPA or the glass of IPA that was dosed with just a touch of Star San solution ended up oxidizing faster based on the fact that it turned that purplish grayish color before the one in the glass alone did. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jake Houlihan has mentioned it too a bunch of times on the at least the Brewlosophy chat and conversations that we've been talking about. He's mentioned it a bunch of times that he won't. I think it's Jake that won't use Star San as a sanitizer because of that oxidation capacity. And then Jake will say it in lagers that he's seen it, that he's seen like the color of a lager beer change when he used Star San. I've never experienced that, and I've used these both interchangeably for years.
Yeah.
So it would be interesting to do this again, and see how the results come out.
Yeah, with an any IPA, I think we have to do a hazy IPA version of this now. And it just, what if we end up seeing with our own eyes, that a batch of New England IPA that is sanitized with Star San, everything on the cold side, ends up oxidizing faster than one sanitized with iodophor. I mean, that's going to change a lot of people's practice, So I think it's pretty neat stuff. Let's see, Reader Squid, I don't doubt that's a real name, commented, I only use iodophor after cleaning my conical when using lactobacillus or Brettanomyces.
Interesting. So he's thinking that iodophor. That's what we were talking about earlier. So he's thinking that iodophor has a better chance of getting rid of Brettanomyces and bacteria, right? I'm guessing that's what he's saying.
That's what it sounds like. Yeah. Yeah. I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's been largely debunked. I think that Star San, if I remember correctly, I think Star San themselves wrote an article right whenever COVID came out, saying that, hey, yeah, Star San does does, essentially just the same job as an iodine-based sanitizer. And I think they even sort of cheekily at the end said, and by the way, we have SanaClean, which is our iodine-based sanitizer if you want to use it instead.
Is SanaClean the iodine-based one that they make? I thought SanaClean was a anti-foaming. I mean, that's iodine. It doesn't foam either, but I thought it was like an anti-foaming version of Star San. I really don't know.
I may be wrong. It's one of those. SanaClean, we used it. I've used it before. And SanaClean, we used it as a sanitizer when I used it. I'm not sure. I thought it was iodine based, but maybe they have a separate iodine based one or iodophor one.
In any event, I'm actually kind of with Squid, though. I would use iodophor after any sour. I have used, for example, a PET carboy that I soured a beer in. I will always use both Star San and Iodophor before trying to ferment a clean beer in it. I'm not into this whole just have separate equipment thing. I understand why people might do that, but I don't have a shed that I can put all my brewing stuff in. So I'll interchange them, but I will go the extra length to ensure that they're, as sanitary as they possibly can be before I use them. So next comment comes from Aaron, who says, I've definitely tasted iodine in beers, especially when used to sanitize bottles. The directions say to let it air dry, which eliminates all iodine residue. I've heard iodine is much more effective than Star San, but that we don't really need it to be surgical quality for brewing.
Yeah, this is one of those too that I've heard a bunch of times, right? Iodophor says you're supposed to let it air dry, and Star San says don't fear the foam, right? I don't know that there's much to either of those. And again, that's my anecdotal experience with these two, is that there doesn't seem to be any effect. I've never been able to air dry a keg after I've purged it, and I don't want to air dry a keg after having purged it, pushed out a liquid. I kind of like that, and I appreciate that. And the beers haven't seem to taste worse because of that. Now, again, I have never compared a beer that had, Star or iodophor versus nothing, right? Versus water. And maybe I guess we could do a rinse experiment, although I don't know how much interest there would be about rinsing Star San or rinsing iodophor after use. But again,
whatever.
Maybe. But both of these are no rinse sanitizers. Okay. So both of these are, if you don't rinse out, they should be okay to put into your beer. And again, they're low concentrations. So even if there's a little bit of sanitizer or a little bit of Star San or a little bit of iodophor that gets in your beer, how much are you actually impacting whenever you're adding, 5 gallons or 20 liters of beer on top of that?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I agree with you. And just an aside, Aaron, if you're doing bottles, what I found works now. People are probably going to poo-poo this as well, but the last few batches of beer that I bottled prior to moving into kegging, I just made sure that the bottles were really clean ahead of time, and then I put them in my dishwasher and ran it without soap, without detergent in there. Ran it on the a high heat setting, and I didn't have a single infected bottle, no bottle bombs or anything like that. So again, that heat over time, which is what you're going to get in a dishwasher, is likely going to do the trick. And they dry out relatively quickly because they're warm. So final comment comes from Jim Fisher, who says, I've been using iodophor for a few months. It's easy, hasn't stained my Spidell fermenter noticeably, which is an HDPE fermenter, and is much easier on my hands than Star San, which dries out my cuticles, resulting in peeling and bloody fingernails. But I'm still not comfortable with that skull and crossbones warning on the stuff that can kill you dead. I know, read the directions, but still, iodophor is poison.
Well, yeah, I mean, iodine, it is, I guess, in a high enough concentration.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not suggesting that anybody drink iodine or iodophor, but the concentration is important whenever you're talking about poisons, especially. But that's funny. It's the staining for iodophor is an issue. I accidentally spilled some on a countertop at a previous house that we lived in, and I think that stain is still there.
I thought iodine dissipated as the free iodine started to disintegrate or whatever. I mean, that was my understanding, which is why an iodophor solution will slowly get. I left some out. I actually pulled a gallon off of a bucket of it, the stuff that I made for sanitization, and just left it out to see what would happen. And I think it took 3 or 4 weeks, and it was the color of water. I mean, there was no more tint.
Well, I mean, maybe in solution, but on that countertop, it definitely stained that countertop. There was nothing I could do to get it off. I didn't clean it off quickly, which was probably the problem. But
Typical
but yeah, I
dude
mean,
move there.
yeah, or who knows what was on that countertop or what it was covered with or coated with that may have interacted. But that stain was stuck and it was not going anywhere.
Well, that is all we've got on sanitizing with Star San and Iodophor. Cade, do you have anything else before we wrap up?
No, I do kind of want to see a repeat of this one in an IPA, so maybe we'll start pitching that and see where we can come up with a future experiment on this one.
Yep, I think it'd be interesting as well. Well, don't forget to check out the Brew Lab, where Cade takes you into the lab with brewing scientists to discuss fascinating research they've done on our favorite beverage. And as always, you can read more about the experiment we discussed by clicking the link to the article on brewlosophy.com in the description of this episode. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman.